Good afternoon, everybody. Another hot, well, it's still spring, but it feels like summer, but it's very hot. And right here in Harare, I am enjoying the sun. We haven't had the sun for a bit, so I'm looking forward to this summer, although I expect it to be hotter than perhaps last year. Hopefully the rains will come in earlier. And you guys, how's the week so far?
Yeah, I'm enjoying the sun and the heat. And what did you do with your hair? Are you trying to look older?
So let me tell you a very interesting story. It turns out you can sell your hair, and it happens that my hair had grown quite a bit and I could sell it. And in these hard times, I thought, you know what, I might as well raise a few dollars for school fees.
How much did you get for your hair?
I'm not going to say.
And who are the buyers? Are they just buying any type of hair, or
do they know that they're getting your hair?
Well, a lot of our women are wearing weaves now, so
okay.
yeah. I'm sure some lucky woman will get my hair. Yeah, so
it's probably the closest she'll get to you.
At least I'm not selling my kidney.
Okay, yeah, I guess.
That we would want your kidney.
No, you look different. I couldn't really place it whether it makes you look younger or older.
No, you definitely looks older.
But you look different.
Oh, different.
But isn't that like a jersey like t-shirt gonna make you hot?
Not quite. This is it's knitted wear, and it's actually very cool. As you can see,
Okay.
Appropriate dress for summer. And you wearing a hat indoors?
Some of us are truant. We don't take the rules of polite society as seriously as you do.
Okay. Perhaps that explains why you're drinking a Heineken.
Oh, yeah, geez. I was actually at a very interesting dinner last night. You'd have liked it. It was black tie, so everybody got dressed up. It was a cigar dinner, and they had lots of interesting wine and whiskey. So I'm a little bit under the weather, and I'm going to take it easy today. So Heineken actually launched this new version called Silver, which has, it's their version of, it's a light beer. It has 20% less alcohol content.
What were you guys celebrating at that dinner? The inauguration?
No, we weren't celebrating anything. We were just it's just a bunch of guys getting together to have to light up some interesting habanos and have an interesting conversation.
Okay. Yeah, fantastic. Yeah. And Ranga, maybe you want to do the introductions?
Yes.
What
we are on this Spring Valley Coffee. Another gift from our friend from Kenya. And I try to look.
So far, what do you think of the coffee so far?
Look, I'm not a coffee person, but I like it. It's it feels like it's on the mild side. It's not like the heavy stuff that you guys usually drink that smells like something else. But yeah, this one's really something that I can latch onto. Yeah.
No, usually what we take is roasted beans, coffee beans. This doesn't feel like they were roasted enough. Can you smell it?
When is the latest, by the way? Yeah, it doesn't. It's very mild. When is the latest, by the way, that you guys can have coffee during the day without it affecting your sleep?
I think
but it's a Friday. Who cares about sleeping? What a Friday night.
What are you TikTok who's going to get up to on a Friday night? If you
maybe we go for all-night prayers.
Okay.
Very apt, and we need them. And today was a special day for UZ graduates. I understand that how many people graduated today?
Probably 3,000. I don't have the number offhand, but it's actually the start of the graduation season. So it has started in the UZ. So you should expect the rest of the country, the universities there to.
And all these 3,000 graduates, what are they looking forward to? What's going to happen to them?
Emigrating.
You're going to jump the border.
like when you're just finishing school, you're so hopeful, and obviously the first option is for you to get a job in your own country. So I think that's what most of them are thinking of. But like what Shumba here is saying, I think for Zimbos, it looks like there are more. Any hope of opportunities tends to be outside the country, sadly.
When does reality actually hit home? You've just recently graduated. Is it 2 years of unemployment, 3 years? When does reality hit that maybe things are not as bright as one would have hoped?
Well, I would like to think that if you're an undergraduate student, you're alive to the world around you, so you've got a pretty good sense already before you started your studies, the state of the Zimbabwean economy, what your prospects are for whatever career track you choose. So I think that especially the current cohort, because they're living in the information age, they're digital natives. I mean, I remember I probably used a computer for the first time in my 20s, right? But I can't imagine that's true for anybody graduating. Today, I mean, they've probably had.
You just confirming to us that you went to a Senyonka.
I did. And yeah, so these guys have been online. They've had access to the world's information from the time they were teenagers, probably before. So they know what the reality on the ground is, and they probably actually have a better sense for it than the three of us here, because we tend to be very abstract and analytical, and they actually are on the ground, and they know what.
Ranga, any pearls of wisdom? What would you tell the new graduates, given this reality that Trufaro has just painted?
I think they just need to be realistic and accept things for what they are. But I think instead of maybe words of wisdom to them, I would say to the institutions, they also need to have some counseling sessions for their students. to be honest, because you know what? That's why we've got this problem now of drug abuse and all. Someone goes through an entire 3-4 years of tertiary education. Obviously, you've got some expectation. Say someone is studying, say, accounting. They're already calling themselves an accountant, an economist, a lawyer, only to find that there are no opportunities. And all that you are hearing from the policymakers you have to create your own job. How do you do that? I mean, this person has been in school all their life. They can't just wake up the next day creating a job. I think it's easier if someone has got some exposure. So you need to get the exposure, you need to get the network, the contacts, and also the experience for you to then say, okay, probably I need to go the entrepreneur way. So I think the institutions needs to include counseling as part of what they.
Oh, come on, Ranga! You want them to hold hands and sing Kumbaya?
No, just tell the students that you know what things can be such that you may actually finish and not get a job.
I think I tend to agree with Ranga. He's got a point around drug abuse. I mean, how do people end up?
Yeah, look, I mean, certainly my heart goes out to them, but I think that there's more pragmatic advice that we can give these youngsters, which is the world has changed.
It was probably not a good idea to study.
No, studying is a good idea. So, and this is what I want to get to say, certainly when we graduated, there was no opportunity to actually immigrate to places like the UK and Canada because their immigration laws were very different than from today. Today, those countries are embracing immigrants with certain skill sets. So there's an opportunity for people to actually emigrate, earn a good living, send money home, which is much better than people who graduated 3, 4, 5 years ago. So they need to be alive to these opportunities.
But you know that you need a sponsor. For example, in the UK, you need a sponsor, and if you don't have a sponsor, I think you need to raise something like £5,000 or so.
Yeah, and I think, but
a lot of these graduates, from what Ranga is saying, don't
No,
have
they,
that
they,
kind of
they
money.
don't have that kind of money, and I think this is actually there was a conversation that you probably participated in where we were talking about. This is something that this is a problem that bankers should solve, because certainly if they raise 5, 8, 10 grand and they go into the first world and get a job, they have capacity to pay it back. Right, it's just a timing difference. It's just they don't have the money up front. But so there is scope to actually emigrate, and even if you can't emigrate, right? So the other ways that the world has changed that I think is an opportunity for these youngsters. So there are global platforms like GitHub. So if you studied computer science, or if you know how to code, and you have access to a computer and a little bit of data, you can open a GitHub account, get work online, and get paid in US dollars from right here in Harare, right?
There would be about maybe 20 or 30 odd students who would have those sort of skills.
So you can. Well, there's a whole class that does computer science for 3-4 years, right? But even if you haven't done computer science, there's a whole bunch of courses in coding that are online that are free, right? From the world's best universities, your Harvard's, MIT, Stanford, and that sort of thing. So you can learn to code, and you can engage with these platforms and to start to do work that you get paid real money for. I mean, it's not the case that it's just doom and gloom. You don't have to accept the situation on the ground in Zimbabwe. The world has changed, and the world is bigger than Zimbabwe.
Okay.
But it also...
All right, gentlemen, I'm gonna have to stop It's not really okay. All right, I see you've got something that you really want to.
So just to say, Alfaro is making a very interesting point, but then it means we need to then roll back and say, in terms of our educational policy, what should it be like? Because the coding that you're talking about, imagine someone who's doing Divinity and Shona, or some other course that they're doing. Which
why are you picking Divinity and Shona?
It's a very nice combination. No offense to
the arts,
arts and all,
to the humanities.
Yes, but if the thrust is for us to be able to export our talent, I think we might as well do that by actually exposing to the right programs, and then we don't waste time because all these kids that are going to university, they've got potential even to do the hard stuff. You'd rather have them there even for 7 years doing something that's really worth.
Perhaps they should go to the polytechnics rather than to university, but that's a story for another day. I think the real reason why we're here and why
to have a drink.
Well, that's true. Drown our sorrows.
What sorrows? Who's?
But anyway, gentlemen, the agenda really is for us to look at what businesses can do in the next coming 5 years. I think the incoming government is very clear on the agenda, and we've been in Zimbabwe long enough. We sort of know exactly what to expect. Those who don't know what to expect, I think they can just roll back to a number of our Friday Drinks series. And I think it's very clear what's likely to happen. But the question is, what should business do? And for that, where I would like us to start with is just giving a general review, a quick review of the economy. But I want to use a specific data point to give that review. And I want to use the ZIMRA revenue, tax revenue, right, as perhaps a way in which we can start understanding this. And ZIMRA, for the first 6 months of the year, they produced a report. Thank you very much, ZIMRA. And they did a fantastic job, I think. They've got graphs and everything like that. But the top numbers from what we see...
You like reports with pictures.
Yeah, it helps. It helps. It certainly helps. But the number that we want to talk about is, well, the top number is that they collected 4.4 trillion in Zim dollars.
What does that mean?
We're going to get into that. And US dollars, they actually collected 1.3 billion in the first 6 months. So the first question that obviously we want to talk about is, what do these numbers actually mean in an inflationary and fluctuating exchange rate? Ranga, maybe you want to give us context, especially for the 4.4 trillion, which could vary. Its value could be 1 billion to, or maybe 800 million to as much as
2.5 billion, depending on which
About
rate,
1.
on when
Yeah.
most of it was collected and what the rates you're using.
Would be about 1.5. So
Okay.
between 800 could easily be between 800 million to about 1.5 billion.
Yes, again, that characterization actually shows the problems that we have, especially with a hyperinflating currency, and what it means in terms of planning the for the expenses that you need to undertake. So that number, you can't really. It's also a reflection of the operating environment where the Zim dollar has been losing value, and for planning purposes, I think the most important number for me would be the US dollar, because ask yourself this question: maybe 5 years ago, when the economy was not as dollarized as it is right now, how much were they collecting as USDs directly? So they've got 1.32 billion right now. They were budgeting for 1.37, but they're actually collecting real US dollars. And imagine if they didn't have this convoluted current scenario. That number you've given is between 800 to 2.5. Imagine if it was 2 billion. So you've got a 2 billion, a 1.3, that's an easily 3.2, almost 4 billion. And you can actually, it was going to be easier to plan properly with that kind of number. But I think what you can't tell from that number is actually the distortion that will also happen in the economy, where people would have to look at, okay, you're collecting your revenue both in Zim dollars and USDs. How much of that can you, are you going to pay in an equal proportion the taxes, or you can choose to pay mostly in Zim dollars or in the currency? So there's that distortion that...
Well, what you'd be interested in is perhaps not the absolute numbers, but the fact that they can actually pay some of the civil servants and some of their contractors in Zim dollars. I don't think it's necessarily a problem that they're collecting in Zim dollars. The problem becomes a problem when you're not collecting enough, when your expenses are running way ahead of your collections. Maybe, Shumba, you want to get in, what are your thoughts on this, on these numbers?
Yeah, so if we take the Zim dollar figure and we are generous in our conversion, and we assume it's $1.5 billion, and we add that to the 1.3, that takes us to 2.8 billion. And we know that historically during the GNU, we were collecting 3.6, 3.7 billion. So already we are running several hundred million dollars short of what we were generating in taxes previously.
Well, this is just 6 months.
Okay, so that's
what's interesting is this is 6 months, and
So then
it would outperform what we were collecting during the GNU.
So the fiscal space has expanded actually.
Well, we're collecting, we've got new taxes.
Yeah, and the numbers could be higher if you'd factor maybe the losses through the informalization of the economy. So maybe that GNU period you're talking about, the economy was largely formal. So it means
so if you annualize that,
yes.
then we're actually doing better by almost $2 billion, which is
Or 1.5.
yeah. Which is quite impressive, given that just a couple of weeks ago we got a GDP number that indicated that there hadn't been any growth between 2013.
Well, we're collecting. It just tells us that we're a highly taxed country. That's what it's telling us, because we've got a new tax. So, for example, if you look at the 2% tax that Ntuli introduced, at some point, and we'll get into that, it was contributing 11 to 12% of our tax revenues. It's dwindled. It's now around 7 to 8%. It's come off, but clearly we're collecting more. Part of it could be because of the new taxes, and part of it could be an expanded economy, the number of people that we're actually collecting from actually has increased. Although there's higher informalization, but the number of people that we're actually collecting from, part of it could be from your mining companies, which are highly formalized for the most part.
And there has been a commodity boom over the last 5 years.
A commodity boom. Part of it could be oil. If you remember fuel, if you look at fuel taxes,
they're quite high as well.
The single biggest contributor to tax is fuel tax. And if you think of the price today and the price 10 years ago, it's fundamentally different. So it may not speak directly to the core economy, but it speaks directly to how we're collecting as far as tax is concerned. That Zimra is actually doing a good job of collecting taxes. The question really becomes on the expenditure side. So it's well and good to be collecting 4.4 trillion and 1.3, but if you are spending more, which if you look at it from the GNU perspective, we are not spending as much as we are now. Would you like to speak to
every
that?
last penny.
We're
literally eating everything that we killed.
And more, because there's the inflation tax that comes in. Would you like to speak to that, Ranga?
Yeah, so the expenses obviously have always run ahead of our collection. That's why every now and then we would see them, the condonation bill being brought to Parliament because of the expenses overrun. And I think another really worrying thing that is probably very most common to Zim than in other economies is the extent of the quasi-fiscal expenditures. So it means the expenses are not just limited to the budgeted number. There are certain institutions that are allowed, especially the central bank, to be funding certain expenses outside of budget. Then you add the fact that even the budget itself is actually overshot with the condonation bill being actually the order of day. Every time every time you're always seeing Minister of Finance saying they've actually spent more than enough. So I think we don't have, we really need to then try and make sure that our expenses are probably, they need to be informed by how much we are collecting. Okay. And it's actually worrying that you are saying maybe the increase is because more people are being taxed and etc. But that increase in revenue or in taxes is not linked to economic activity. So it's actually not a good thing. If anything, you're actually constraining even the capacity of people to spend because their disposable incomes are actually being constrained on a regular basis. So it's not the right thing, the right way to.
Rufar, you're the accountant. Help us understand this. How's it possible that your mining royalties have recorded a negative real growth rate? So your royalties are actually coming off. What does this speak to? Could it be a question of capital expenditure, allowances? What could be happening there as far as mining royalties?
I don't think capital allowances will affect royalties. They'll probably affect the taxes at the profit before tax level. So we've seen global commodity prices trend higher. So you would expect the royalties to be higher unless they're being reported or paid in Zim dollars. And then you have, your challenge there now is...
No, they're paying in actual commodity or in US dollars.
Yeah, but how are they reporting them?
They're separating. Zimra is actually separating. Because if it's Zim dollar, if it's...
So to the extent that you have some of those collections in Zim dollars, if it trends lower, it may not be that the actual amounts are lower, but it's translation issues.
Okay, and then the next one is VAT on imports, almost the same as local VAT. What does this say about local manufacturing? Because it sounds like we're actually importing a lot more.
Well, you can't read that into it because the local VAT will include the VAT on retail and wholesale. And a lot of the products being sold in that space would be imported. So local VAT doesn't necessarily speak to local manufacturing because the retail and wholesale sector are so big. But I've always felt that the manufacturing sector in Zimbabwe is in decline. It has been for the longest time, and it's probably not going to bounce back to the levels that it was before we saw this deindustrialization, because the rest of the world moved on. They invested more in technology, in infrastructure, in supply chains. So every year that you actually don't have a competitive manufacturing industry, you're actually getting further and further behind. And can you imagine, like, even if we just zoom out, it's not only true for Zimbabwe, it's like a global phenomenon, right? If you think about China being the world's factory, right? The rest of the world can't just wake up and decide, well, we want to onshore manufacturing again, because you're going to be paying $5,000 for an iPhone.
True. I've got a specific question for you, because there's a running rhetoric that we are investing in our local manufacturers and we are no longer a supermarket for South Africa. And yet Zimra numbers, what Zimra is telling us is actually we are increasingly becoming a supermarket for the globe. I don't necessarily think it's a bad thing, but would you like to speak to the rhetoric that we are, and yet the numbers, the Zimra numbers, are actually telling us that VAT on imports is almost the same as local VAT?
Yeah, so I think there is an intention, there is a desire to support local manufacturing, but it's just a desire. The action on the ground actually speaks a different thing altogether, because we are incentivizing importation through the auction, through the formal currency allocation mechanism. So if someone can easily get cheap currency from the auction, as long as you demonstrate that the things that you want to bring are on the priority list, why would they manufacture? So I think that desire to try and prop the local manufacturer is not really supported by action on the ground. So as long as there's that incentive, I think we'll continue seeing more importation. And I think a bigger portion of those things that we are importing are not really, we don't need them.
So the auction is actually subsidizing imports.
Yes.
Okay,
so you continue to see people importing.
Another question for you. We've seen payee record real growth. I mean, the narrative we hear is that you have more and more people unemployed, and yet payee, we've seen real growth there. What could be the reason? Is it because people's salaries are increasing, for example, civil servants, and people's salaries are moving from Zim dollar?
I think it's more the USD. Current salaries moving more to the USD increasingly, and I still think that maybe that number actually has got potential to grow. Again, the informalization also is not doing that number service, because I suspect some of the smaller institutions are probably paying cash directly to their employees, or paying for some other service. So it's I think that real growth is just reflects. It's a different thing altogether if you are paying Zim dollars that are depreciating on a regular basis, and than when you start to pay USDs that they can hold value. And this USD number has been increasing over time as Zim dollars become scarce and scarce. I'm sure I saw the story that was circulating on social media, where was it Tongat, which is what most companies have done actually, to say they have increased the US dollar portion, because right now salaries are being paid in a certain proportion between Zim dollars and USD. So as you see the proportion increasing, obviously the pay also. So
that's a big, huge threat to Zimra. What Ranga is saying, and I tend to agree, is the informalization of the market. As we move towards US dollar cash, people are going to sidestep Zimra and just pay their employees in US dollars cash rather than going through formal banking systems. Your thoughts on that?
Yeah, look, I think the formal sector is still going to pay its taxes. So what will happen is that the formal sector is also going to move to US dollars, and Zimra's collections are going to be in hard currency, which I think is better for Zimra,
But
and I think it's better
lots of
for
people, once you move into a cash society, then you're providing, because if you look at Zimra's point of collection is always the banking system.
Yes, but so
And if you are away out, if you move out of the banking system, it's going to be very difficult to make those collections.
yeah, but the big corporates are always going to pay their taxes, even if most of their income is actually in cash. Okay. So I don't think there's a risk there from the collector of revenue having a problem. I think where they're at a disadvantage, obviously, is that you've got this massive portion of the economy that's completely informal, that is not in your tax base. And that's one of the challenges when you create incentives for people to be unbanked, to trade in cash.
That's a good way for us to just segue and just talk about the critical things that we're seeing in our economy. So the first one is the informalization of the economy, where more and more people are becoming informalized. Then the second one is actually the move away from banking system to, again, informal banking system, but more pertinently to a cash society. So Nostro or Zim dollar, but more and more of our trade becoming hardcore cash. The third element is the headwinds, as far as, and you've touched on this briefly, global prices for minerals. As those are coming off, that will affect us directly, and it's going to affect Zimra collections. Already we're starting to see the platinum guys reporting lower and lower revenues because of the global slump in prices.
And it's only getting started. I mean, I think, this is the challenge.
So I'll get into but I just wanted to give a color of what we believe are the headwinds that are coming away. Debt restructuring is not going to happen. More and more, the communiques that we've got from government so far is that we are going to go it alone. But we already know that we've exhausted our facilities with Afrexim Bank, as well as the Chinese Zim Bank, and high interest rate, and our surrender requirements cannot even service those. So those are headwinds that are coming our way. And what I want us now to focus on is perhaps from a sectoral perspective, the different sectors, how are they likely to respond to these headwinds in the next coming 5 years? And you've already, so I'll start with you, Rufaro, because you've already highlighted one, which is mining. Can we talk about mining? What's going to happen in the next 5 years?
Yeah, I think, one of the challenges being a resource-rich country is that we're price takers on the global commodities market. When the world changes, it affects commodities markets, and it affects the mining houses and resource-rich countries like Zimbabwe. So if you take platinum, for example, we've had a party in terms of high platinum prices for the last 5 to 10 years. But, there's some serious headwinds looking forward, because most of the world's major cities and countries are going to ban the sale of internal combustion engine vehicles starting in 2030. And so what does that have to do with the price of platinum? You ask.
Demand for the next 10 years will
platinum, more than almost 70% of global platinum production goes into catalytic converters, which are used in vehicles with an internal combustion engine. So if the world stops making internal combustion engine vehicles, then that's going to have a dramatic impact on the demand for platinum. Which is why I feel so much consternation when we have these debates around in this part of the world about beneficiation. Oh, no, we shouldn't export the raw material. Let's place limits and this, that, and the other. You can wake up one day and that nobody is interested in that resource. So we really need to just get it out of the ground.
So the big headwind is platinum. You see the prices or the demand, global demand coming off, and the prices coming.
Yeah, it's going to take. Have you seen what's happened with the price of lithium over the last 6 months? It's also taken a huge beating.
Yeah,
there
are many substitutes for lithium.
Well, not so much that there's substitutes. So with lithium, it's a different story. Lithium is one of the most abundant elements on Earth. The reason why the pricing went haywire wasn't because there's a shortage of lithium ore. It's because there's a shortage of processing capacity to take it to battery grade, right? And like there's that. Well, I won't call it an axiom.
Yes,
But-
please.
It's just there's that saying, that the best cure for high prices
Is a high price.
Is high prices. So when the lithium prices went through the roof, a lot of money was poured into that space to build out this processing capacity.
So the price of lithium will soften again, and then gold.
Well, you're a gold bug. You would probably know much more about gold than I do. I mean, are people gonna?
Well, I think what's certain is the price is not gonna continue going up. It will soften a bit, or remain stable, but it's not going up. And we haven't increased our gold production. Already gold production up to August, I believe, is already 13% down.
Okay.
And that's a worrying view. There was a commodity boom cycle and we should have really increased our capacity, but we didn't. And then the other thing about gold is it requires a lot of exploration and we haven't been doing the exploration. So there's a limit there. But thanks for that. Ranga, I want you to focus on agriculture as a sector. So we've covered mining, agriculture. What do you see in the next 5 years?
So the demand for food will always be there, especially with the war in Ukraine, given the importance of Russia and Ukraine in the production of grain. And we were already seeing shortages with most African countries being dependent.
Didn't we recently get this fantastic gift after flying to St. Petersburg?
Wow.
50,000 tons.
And
Of grain.
and how many days do you think that will take us? So I think maybe on that level, there's going to be that issue. But it's probably, I would say, from the African standing point, it's actually an opportunity for us to, do what the Europeans have done, and to a certain extent, the Americans. So when it became clear that we were going to have a shortage of gas because of the Ukraine-Russia war, they actually started investing in
Their own agriculture.
in their own gas production. And I don't see why Africa would not be able to. We've got the vast land, arable land, and the climate is good. But obviously, the capital, they were not properly.
You think capital is a problem?
I would say
Not tenure?
No. Look, tenure is a Zim problem, right?
Yeah.
But-
We want to focus on
Yes.
Zim.
So-
And let's not focus. I think tenure is a given. If it changes, kudos. But as is, what are the headwinds and what are the threats and what are the opportunities as far as agriculture is concerned? And I want you to speak to, so for example, the cost side. So if you look at the revenue side, we're a price taker generally. If we're not a price taker, it means Reserve Bank is going to be subsidizing somewhat. But when you look at the cost side, it's all imports. So you look at your fertilizer, you look at your even energy requirements as far as fuel is concerned, it's an import. And also ZESA will have to import quite a bit. And your capital expenditure, those are all imports.
But agriculture will remain highly subsidized for obvious reason that even the election patterns, we should give you some hints on what will happen. So the rural folk would continue to get from foods.
So then the subsidy is going to be higher because fertilizer.
Exactly.
Fertilizer is going up.
Exactly.
Fuel is going up. Okay.
Yeah. So
I get your point.
So the subsidies are going to be higher, but I think the positive areas are areas like in tobacco, where more and more households are actually going into its production, and there was I don't know if
so you think that's going to continue?
Yeah,
in
I
the
think
next
that will
5 years?
continue,
Okay.
and also even its funding. So in the past, they would say the funding has to come offshore, so the merchant could not raise funding locally for the purpose of funding the contract farming. But they're actually trying to open up that funding.
Okay, tobacco done.
Yeah.
Maize. Sorry, I'm rushing because we want to go through so much of the material.
So maize is actually interesting because the more and more you see people getting into tobacco, they're actually reducing their production of maize.
Okay.
But I don't think it's a bad thing because if these guys are earning US dollars, you should be able to buy maize even from across. From
borders.
Zambia, yeah.
Okay.
So I think for me that's not a big,
do you see maize production? So there's a lot of politics around maize production, but I think let's use Zimstats numbers. We haven't breached the 2 million metric tons. We're usually doing about 1.5. In a really good year, we're doing about 1.8. Do you think that we're going to ever produce more than 2 million metric
We're
tons?
into a drought, remember?
No. It's very
For the next 5 years.
No, it's very unlikely because there's that shift that I've already
to
alluded
cash.
to cash. So it's going to be tobacco and also cotton, and because it's always cheaper you can actually import grain, bring in cheaper. So there's really no need to be wasting resources that you could apply in other cash crops into
Fantastic.
into that.
Horticulture?
Horticulture, I see that increasing. There's quite an increase in the number of farmers that are coming back to Zim, and most of them are being attracted by the opportunity in the horticulture space. And what they're bringing access to the markets.
Okay.
That's why horticulture hasn't really taken off in a big way when the black farmer was actually doing it, because access to markets has always been a problem.
Okay.
Yeah. So I see some hubs being created in certain areas where there's a farmer that comes with access to the markets and the people around him.
So there's huge potential to grow
there
$1 US. I mean, already it's like 74 million a year, but there's potential for us
Yes, there's potential. Even funding as well.
Okay.
I know quite a number of in our space asset managers that are partnering with farmers in that particular space because it's easier. It's
US dollar
earning, and the turnaround is actually quite
quick. Okay,
quite
fantastic.
Quick.
So thanks for agriculture. So agriculture, mixed bag.
Yes.
If it's US dollar earning, we're likely to see growth. If it's not US dollar earning, it's likely to slump. I'm not going to talk about manufacturing because it's clear. It's dead in the water.
For sure.
But let's talk about retail and wholesale sector.
Yeah, look, I think the retail and wholesale sector has grown in absolute terms and as in terms of its percentage contribution to the rest of the economy. And I think that will continue to be the case. I think one of the reasons why retail and wholesale has grown is because, for example, when the mines grow and they have better revenues, they employ more people, and that, the retail and wholesale sector always benefits from growth.
Let me get you correctly, because I think I tend to differ with you there. You're saying that retail and wholesale is likely to grow in the next coming 5 years?
As a percentage of the economy, maybe not in absolute terms.
Yeah, we're talking about growth. Are you seeing real growth in that particular sector in the next?
Yeah. So the question. The retail and wholesale sector it's like a proxy for the GDP. So if you think that GDP is going to grow over the next 5 years, then the retail and wholesale sector should grow along with it. My view is we're going to actually not see GDP growth over the next 5 years.
I just needed to get you there. So I think
So sadly, I
actually think that...
And also the fact that it's actually one of the areas that's actually hardest hit by the informalization.
Yeah. That's what I wanted to speak to.
Yeah, that's
the retail sector, because of the price distortions, as far as the exchange rate is concerned, which is going to continue, price controls, which is going to continue, tax, which is going to continue. It makes more and more sense to be informalized. Exactly. And the sector that's going to be hard hit is actually the retail and wholesale sectors.
I know you don't like anecdotes, but if you just asked an average shopper, when was the last time they bought something of value from a big retail chain, you'll be surprised. So most people are actually preferring to go to the tuck shops downtown.
Okay.
Yeah, because the prices are
so
cheaper.
That's the threat. Any opportunity in the retail sector, or I suppose the informalization, any entrepreneur in that space, that's the game.
So that can be an opportunity in any way. It's actually killing the formal businesses.
Okay.
You know, like the most sort of heartbreaking thing is to see the informal guys with their wares on the pavement just opposite the shop of a formal retailer who is selling more or less the same product.
True. Okay.
These guys are not paying
All right.
taxes.
So I need to move quite
Yeah,
quickly.
so
Lots
that-
of headwinds there. Finance, banking, financial services.
It's going to be abysmal.
Okay.
And I hate to say this because that's the space that
we are in.
we're in.
Yeah.
But as the economy becomes more and more informal, definitely the sector that's going to take the biggest hit is the banking and finance sector, because
How about arbitrage opportunities? So yes, limited capital and informalization and the cash society, cash economy growing, but a lot of arbitrage opportunities usually lie in the financial services sector.
yeah, so you actually have to have Zim dollars to arbitrage with US dollars. And what we're seeing, I mean, okay, it's been 3 months or 4 months since
We know that's going to change.
Zimstat numbers about the percentage US dollar versus Zim dollar. But at some stage in the next 5 years, I fully expect that the Zim dollar is going to completely
Disappear.
disappear.
Okay, good point. But you have the nostro. The opportunity could be around.
and the nostro could become the next Zim dollar. But and I think it will have a similar fate if it's,
in the 5 years. But as that fate happens, that's where the arbitrage opportunity.
but I think so. Zimbabweans are going through a learning curve. So I think if one were to imagine how much money was made in arbitrage,
Okay, it's not going to be 5 years. It's going to be
but this
Okay.
era of hyperinflation versus
the previous. It just gets
so the
shorter
amount
and
of
shorter.
money to be because
Okay. Any thoughts on financial services?
Yes. So when you look at financial institutions right now, I think most of them are looking at defending their balance sheet as opposed to expanding or seeking growth in other areas. That's why you find some of the big players are already using their balance. They're actually converting their balance sheet into hardening it by building corporate head offices. Those are some of the things that you're allowed to do without falling foul of regulation. And so
your capital, 90% of your capital will be head office.
it's better because imagine if it's Zim dollars and then you just lose it like all
no,
of
but
it.
what's hilarious is that you could actually have a headquarters
Yeah.
for a non-existent business.
No, look, but I think the flip side is, remember, these are institutions that lost tremendous value in 2008, where a bigger portion of the balance sheet were monetary assets in forms of TBs and other government securities. So given those that scenario, are they not better off with a corporate head office, even if it means the operations are gone?
To be fair,
It gives you an opportunity to restart.
to be fair to them, they're not. Their corporate head offices are not the only property in their portfolio.
Exactly.
In fact, what I suspect we will find 5 years from now is that when you analyze the banks, they will look a lot like real estate businesses with banking licenses.
Interesting. So let's move on quickly. Technology, ICT.
Yeah, that's it's one of my pet passions. The technology space.
But try and be objective.
Devices and
so
gadgets.
yeah, we're
and-
talking about in Zimbabwe
Yeah.
specific.
So-
What are you saying?
So there's a global megatrend where the world is just becoming more and more embedded with technology, whether it's the Internet of Things. More and more devices are able to connect to the internet. We use more and more data in our day-to-day lives, and if I was to guess, going forward, we're going to use more, not less. So the question really is there's this tension between local ICT and global ICT, right? So, for example, there is no local Google, right? Everybody uses the Google that's based in somewhere in California, right? But there's certain things that you need to have locally, right, to access the internet. So you have these telecoms with their fiber, optical fiber networks, and that's how a lot of Zimbabweans connect to the internet. But that space is also changing and being disrupted. So you have global services like Starlink, right, where you don't need a local service provider to access the internet.
Good point.
You don't need. So I think
lots of headwinds in that space.
There's lots of headwinds because it's a very dynamic space. So what was true,
and we haven't been investing. We just don't have the capital.
Yeah. So internally, I think one of the biggest headwinds will be a regulation. So, for example, if you look at telecoms, I think they've been trying to push hard to get a tariff review. Actually, to get their tariffs in USDs, and that hasn't been coming through. And what it has done is it has actually affected their capacity to invest. So you see some of the big players that had ambitiously gone into the global capital markets and raised funding, they're actually struggling to service that debt. They're having to resort to going to their shareholders for rights issue. And these are already hard-pressed kind of shareholders already.
Okay, you said enough. Enough said. The last industry I'm going to talk about, tourism. Thoughts there?
Yeah, so, tourism we've got such amazing potential in terms of destinations, but we're incredibly expensive. And
do you see any change in the next 5 years?
So a lot of that has to do with the regulation. And if there is no change in the regulatory framework, then, I think that we're just going to plod along.
Would you like to be very specific? What sort of regulation would you like to see change?
So, for example, I mean, the biggest one obviously is currency, right? So a lot of people just can't wrap around their brain, coming into the country, and there's these different price mechanisms, and you change
10 currencies.
It's so that's a problem. And then if you look at the regulation of our skies, it makes it very expensive to fly. It's not just a Zimbabwean problem; it's actually a regional problem. Flights in this part of the world are just so much more expensive than in other regions. And so, but still, I'm seeing quite a lot of airlines sign on to routes in Zimbabwe. Hopefully that competition is going to reduce prices, but so far, from what I can tell, it hasn't. So the regulation in spaces like airlines is definitely going to make it expensive, and people globally are price sensitive,
and also the product itself.
Okay.
So I'd say most of our product tired because of years of deferred capitalization.
Okay.
So and then you add to that the cost that how much it costs you, say, per room or for a tourist.
Victoria Falls
actually becomes very expensive.
Yeah.
To a point that even locals they find it it's actually cheaper for you actually to go, for example, to South Africa, if you think of holiday compared to maybe to the Vic Falls. So not only are you going is it going to affect your international arrivals, but also the domestic.
Let me tell you an anecdote, and a very funny one. We're going to Kenya.
Right? Yeah.
And it's cheaper for us to fly to Nairobi than it is for us to go to Victoria Falls.
Sadly,
and it's a 3-hour flight to Nairobi. By the way, it's like hardly an hour to get to Vic Falls from Harare.
The experience.
We were organizing a conference or brainstorming on organizing a conference, and when we worked out the cost of having the conference in Vic Falls versus say Sun City in Joburg, it was cheaper.
Yeah. So those are real issues. So just to summarize, what I'm gathering here is price distortions are going to continue. Currency distortions are going to continue. Lots of global headwinds that are adverse to Zimbabwe. But the real opportunity is around currency. If you can earn real dollars offshore, then that's the opportunity, because then your cost base could really be around Zim dollar or Nostro, which is lower than global, but you're earning a hard currency offshore. That's what I'm getting from all the different sectors. But certain sectors are going to be hit hard more than others. And I hope that was very useful. So now what I want us to focus on, it's around what business strategies we could have. And I'm going to put it to you because we don't have much time. I'm told that we should be done by now, but I'm just going to put it to you guys and then hear your thoughts. In terms of business strategy, what I think is perhaps the best strategy going forward are three things. The first one is becoming a conglomerate as opposed to being focused, right? So you have that opportunity. And I want to hear what you think about that, because, conglomerates, really, it's around the risk. In an environment where the risk is high, it's better as a conglomerate because then your income streams are diversified. And we saw that when you look at your typical conglomerates in Zimbabwe, like Delta and TA back then, they became conglomerates post 1965. And it was really because of the environment. Do you think that that's an opportunity? Or do you think that actually businesses should just remain focused? If you're in agriculture, remain in agriculture. If you're in a particular sector, if you're in manufacturing, remain in that particular line. Or if you've got a bit of capital, this is a good opportunity to actually become a conglomerate and diversify your risk because you want to protect your balance sheet.
So I think I would say the environment that we have actually creates an opportunity for someone who's acquisitive to be acquiring weak businesses, put money into them and turn around those kind of business. I think it has been the INSCO model for the longest time, where we're taking advantage of the macroeconomic problems to be looking for sometimes distressed assets or some very good assets that are being run by families or by entrepreneurs.
Or lack capital.
Yeah, lack capital. And then you put capital. And this is like local capital mostly. And so if you can use your local balance sheet to make those acquisitions, and if you can also use being creative, some financial engineering. For example, you are a listed player. You are buying, you are making acquisition not with cash but with stock.
Your shares.
Shares of your own company, and then be able to then run them. I wouldn't go for maybe maintaining it as a conglomerate as it were, because it also creates problems of focus. It's good if you do that as an investor because it diversifies your risk. But if you have it in a sort of a group setting, then you can actually get get sidetracked along the way as you're trying to focus on just one thing.
What do you think?
I think it's a terrible idea.
Okay.
Look, if you're running a business successfully in Zimbabwe, with all its challenges, right? You live and work here, and you actually have a profitable operation. What you should be thinking about, because your key risk is Zim risk, right? So, do you have a market that's outside Zim that you can apply your skill set and your local infrastructure?
We'll get into that.
So what I'm saying is, if you're going to diversify, right? Like, so if
diversify markets rather than industry.
Absolutely. Okay. Absolutely, because if you have
we'll get into that as another strategy.
If you expand,
what I want you to just focus on why you think conglomerate in the same market in Zim. Why you think conglomerate versus focus? Why you think it's a terrible idea? Why you think businesses should just continue being?
So number one, the opportunity cost, right, of outside markets, right. Number two, right, Zimbabwe is already an incredibly difficult place to do business. So if chances are you are running a restaurant business and you're good at it and you're making money, right? Notwithstanding all the challenges that we have here, right? What are the chances that if you go downstream or upstream, so let's say you go downstream and you decide to buy an abattoir or a farm, right? What are the chances that your skill set, which has served you incredibly well and allowed you to run a profitable restaurant, is transferable to a farm or an abattoir? or this other,
I hear your point, but usually we call that upstream. But
sorry.
but I do hear your point, and I think it's a valid point. But if we look at historically, the companies that survived from 1965 to 1980, right? And we've already given color to the headwinds. The companies that survived, your TA and your Delta, is primarily because they were conglomerates and they shared that risk.
Yeah, so I think that's I have
and there are not more companies.
I have a different reading of history.
Please give us a.
And this is not just true in Zimbabwe with Delta when it was a conglomerate and TA, and like if you look at Anglo in South Africa as well, right? These businesses were in a jurisdiction that did not allow you to ship capital out of the country, right? So you have this business that's very cash flow positive, and you're looking at your dividends and you're saying, what am I going to do with this cash? You can't ship it out to take advantage of opportunities out of the country. You have to invest locally. So you have no choice. And nobody's actually run the experiment to say if there were other players in the market who had similar amounts of capital competing with them as they went into these other sectors.
But that's
could they have...
Ranga's argument is you can use your stock, right? Instead of using cash, you can use actually your script to buy these companies that are already exposed to other markets. So you're in Zim, but there's a company that's actually earning real US dollars, and you don't have US dollars, real US dollars. And now you have the ability to buy into that story.
I hear you. But what I'm saying is, you spoke to the big conglomerates.
Engineering.
You spoke to the big conglomerates in Zimbabwe historically, right? And I'm saying the reason why Anglo American owned pretty much everything in Zim and Delta was such a conglomerate in
Fair enough. Ranga, do you want to respond to this?
Yeah.
So his argument is actually it's a bad idea to create a conglomerate in the same market because you're still picking up the same risk. You're better off going into a different market where you can diversify the risk that you're afraid of within the local environment.
So there are two things that we just need to consider. So if you've got a player who has got predominantly USD cash on their balance sheet, their options are just limited to Zimbabwe. And I want to believe that is what created some of the conglomerates that we are talking about that way, because they couldn't, either they didn't have capital to go outside.
They weren't allowed to.
And they were not allowed, or they didn't have capital. Pretty much the result is sort of similar. But to the extent that someone has got, can access international capital and be able to raise funding to acquire something external, then you can do that. But when you analyze the Zim companies,
that's a good point.
When you look at the Zim companies right now, you've got this situation where on a good year you are making money in Zim dollar terms, or you actually won't be making money in real terms. So
you've got enough Zim dollars to acquire something local that has an exposure in a different market,
and also even some exporters. I remember was it 2007 when Delta made that acquisition of Ariston. They were very clear that no, it's not like we like this business, but we looked at it and it's foreign currency earning business. So instead of spending time queuing up at the Arab visit, begging for currency, we'll buy this thing.
This is a conversation, and viewers, please chime in. I find it a very interesting conversation to have, and we have different thoughts around it, but let's have this conversation because I think it's very important.
And it's not a bad thing. Think of Insco buying Padenga, right? At the time they used the Zim dollars, direct Zim dollar cash or scrip. But there was a time when we then dollarized and Padenga was able to expand, export. They managed to unbundle it, and it actually created value. So it's also an opportunity. If you've got blocked funds that you can't apply in other markets, just look for opportunities in Zimbabwe and apply your money there.
It would be unfair if I don't give Shumba a right of reply. So quickly, in 1 minute, you want to reply to?
Look, I think. Look, if you've got blocked funds, so you can't ship the money out. Again, I would be very cautious about investing upstream or downstream. Maybe your best bet is just to buy a safe somewhere. Just keep.
But these are Zim dollars. But these are Zim dollars.
Well, if they're Zim dollars, you have to ring fence them.
Yeah,
maybe your better.
They're Zim dollars.
And you can't go on the power market.
And you can't go on the power market.
Then your hands are tied. Then you have to bungle in other.
Then you're in Anglo, Delta, TA, Saka, 1965.
But it always creates an opportunity.
Okay, gentlemen, I think that's a conversation that we can then have. I think we can have a rabbit hole, because that one, is a very contentious one, and it would be great to get business strategists to come in with different thoughts, and then we really focus on that.
For sure.
Because I think that businesses will benefit from the different side. Foray into Africa, seriously, and not just token. So this is a second strategy that businesses can do. And
what will you be offering in Africa?
Okay. So first of all, before I get into there, this is from our expert around Africa, and this is what he says.
Who is this?
He's just an expert.
He's an expert, and this is what
He
they
who
say.
shall not be named.
He
It could be a she.
Oh, okay.
yeah,
Reminds me of
and
Harry
they're
Potter
very
and
important
Voldemort.
points. They're very important points, and I'm just going to read this out. And these are their words on Africa foray. We no longer have capital, and this is Zimbabwean companies. We no longer have capital, and most companies lack the entrepreneurial skill to get it done. It's necessary to, number one, obtain the entrepreneurial skill, because you could be a corporate, and when you're moving into Africa, it's actually more entrepreneurial. And do you have that skill set? You may have to partner with the right individual organization from Zim or in country where you want to go into, and almost certainly your current managers aren't going to cut it out. So he's arguing that actually, when you look at your current managers in Zim, they're not entrepreneurial enough to go, and perhaps they're the stumbling block. They're the ones who are actually telling the shareholders that no, we're not going to go, because they know that they don't have the capacity. They don't have the capacity. So there's a moral hazard there. And then he says, number two, you need to figure out where you're going to get the capital. Most likely source is supplier credit. So you're saying whatever business you're in, if you go in, then you need to establish those relationships. And a good source of capital is suppliers. Okay, that's a good point. Then finally, they say, we do know that doing it without capital is high risk. So best to have strong capital base. Also need to be very deliberate about choosing the target market. Some markets will be harder for us than others, depending on your specific strengths and weaknesses. So we're saying going into Africa is a good strategy, but it comes with these threats. If you don't have a good capital base, it's just going to be very difficult when you go abroad. Then the second thing that they picked up is the entrepreneurial skill, because really what you're exporting is the entrepreneurial skill, and most managers are not entrepreneurs. What are your thoughts first on that strategy going into Africa? Do you think that's a good strategy given all the headwinds that we've seen in Zim? And then I want you to contextualize that with what our African expert has said.
It's a good strategy. My only worry is we have got nothing to offer to Africa. And like what? It's different from maybe 10 years ago, because we had the skills. We also had the technology. I'm just thinking of a company like Sitco at the time. So this
let's not be specific with the company, but
but I actually used it because of the issue of the technology that I wanted to highlight. So right now we have got really nothing to offer to Africa. And also just remember that as we were drifting backwards, the rest of the continent was actually moving. So maybe 15 years ago it made sense to go into Zambia, into Malawi, etc. And remember, I always give this statistic about how Kenya was smaller than Zim. Now it's 10 times or 5 times bigger than
8 times.
Or 8 times, So Africa has actually moved a step ahead of us. And even the feedback that you'd get probably some 10, 15 years ago was always very, very... Zim companies would be received with skepticism. by most African countries. They had to then demonstrate that they actually could do something. It was then, just imagine now, with all the problems that we have experienced over the years. So I think that's an issue. Then the issue of capital, obviously. So you're going there with limited balance sheet. If you have got some bit of capital, I wouldn't name names, but I know of one insurance group that went into Botswana, and they saying the reason why they have been successful with the reinsurance business, is because they capitalized it well beyond regulatory capital. So to the extent that you've got capital, then maybe you can do that, because you can't rely on local funders or even international if you are coming from Zimbabwe.
Well, I'm going to push back quite hard.
And I expect to you, because previously your strategy was instead of conglomerates, go into other markets.
So if you're running a business here and you're making a bunch of money today, right? And we look out into the next 5 years, from a macroeconomic perspective, right? That analysis tells us that you're going to be poorer if you're just doing business in 5 years. That's what it tells us, right? So either you're going to accept this as your reality, that you're going to be poorer, or you're going to go into the region and go through that learning curve. To say, and a lot of what Ranga said is, I completely agree, right? We while we were dealing with our issues, the rest of the world moved on. They adopted the best global practices. They invested in technology, in skills, and all of these things that we haven't here. So it's not going to be a cakewalk if you go to Zambia or Kenya or Nigeria or wherever and try and set up shop there. It's going to be incredibly difficult. But what are your options, right? Because you're sticking around here and just doing what you were doing over the last 5 years, you're almost guaranteed.
It's not too different from people who are crossing the Limpopo.
Almost guaranteed.
You just have to be outside the country.
So you've got to invest in the skills. You've got to figure out how to solve the capital problem. You've got no choice, because if all your eggs are in this basket called Zimbabwe in 5 years, chances are you're going to be poorer.
Okay. Very good points from both sides, and very important things to actually consider. What are your thoughts on, so we're very clear about capital, and you guys have highlighted that if you're going abroad, capital is going to be very, very important. But our African expert talks about the entrepreneurial skill set, the tension between the current managers who are not entrepreneurial and perhaps have actually stopped the foray into Africa. What are your thoughts?
So I think Zimbabwean managers are, on balance, are much more entrepreneurial than managers elsewhere in Africa. And the reason why that's the case is there's just much more chaos in Zimbabwe. So if you're a manager, it's not the case that when you're employed, you go to induction and you get a manual. This is how you run the shop.
That's a good point.
And you stick to this manual, and you can run the place for years, and it makes sense because the rules are constantly changing. You have to actually figure things out on the fly on an ongoing basis. Whereas if you're running a shop in South Africa or in Zambia and other parts of Africa, things,
less entrepreneurial.
You in fact, the owners don't want you to be entrepreneurial. They want you to stick to the knitting, do what you're told. Here's the manual. This is what the rules say. Stick to the rules. If you break the rules, you're fired. In Zim, if you don't break the rules, you get fired.
I tend to agree that Zim forces you to do things that ordinarily you wouldn't do in other markets. And also even the nature of our corporates right now, who are mostly small to middle scale. So you don't have big global brands that operate on the basis of for this manual, this is how you operate. For example, look at the financial services, for instance. If someone is running a big global brand here, basically what are they doing? Someone is telling them what to do on a day-to-day basis. They're just a compliance officer. and they've got a balance sheet to support them. So when they're in trouble, they always call the big brother. But imagine a wholly Zimbabwean focused kind of businesses. They don't have such luxury of a big balance sheet. So every day they have to be nimble. So the entrepreneur ship is there in people. I think maybe what our expert wanted to say, I just said maybe we lost skills along the way. So yes, we can firefight and do a lot of things, but maybe you might be found wanting in an environment where you have to do things right. So, which is another thing that we tend to overlook. I'll give an example of how everyone is clamoring for the US dollar instability. And quite a number of organizations or companies actually closed shop in a dollarized environment because they didn't have the
arbitrage.
They didn't have the arbitrage.
And they were exposed their cost factors.
All of a sudden, you don't have, these things that you are doing, the Kia, and then you are found wanting. So I think that's the...
Well, our expert says you must be very deliberate about the target market. So maybe less Kenya and more DRC, where Kia actually is a competitive advantage. Whereas Kia in Kenya, it's just not going to happen. Okay. Then the third and final strategy, just to reiterate, we say the first one is conglomerate, and the jury is out there. And then the second one is foray into Africa. The jury is still out there. Then the third that I would like to put out is our source of capital, moving away from for-profit capital, which clearly with all the headwinds we've talked about in Zimbabwe, it's just going to be very difficult to find a New York hedge fund that's actually willing to come into Zimbabwe. It's just going to be very, very, very difficult.
You can find a Moscow or St. Petersburg-based hedge fund.
Even they are going to find it problematic to come to Zimbabwe, just given the wide area of problems that we have here. But there's a lot of impact investors, people who are not really looking at just profit, but are looking at impact. So what sort of impact you can make. So they don't really care that Zimbabwe is going through whatever it's going through.
Yes, like the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation.
Exactly, and they're the largest investor in Zimbabwe. And yet you will not categorize them under for profit. So Microsoft is not going to come here, but Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation will come here, and they will look for partners. And business need to start looking actively at impact investors rather than for-profit investors as a strategy.
Look, I think that's true for certain sectors. So, for example, if you're in the energy business and your skill set is in solar, right? That's it ticks the box of being sustainable energy or green, and it ticks the box in terms of its social impact on people's lives. People who previously didn't have access to electricity now have access to electricity. So it has this social impact that these kind of funds care about. And it's actually economically viable. So you, the entrepreneur running such a business, can actually make money. And social capital tends to not be interested in a return. Their primary concern is that it's viable, that they're not throwing
and
money
social
away.
impact. And social impact is not just the environment. It could be youth employment. It could be women employment, women issues. I know these are not your typical items on the agenda, but it could actually mean more and more women are employed, or more and more youth are employed. So from a profit perspective, it might not make sense to employ the number of young or youth and women. But if you have impact investors and you can demonstrate, and already you're demonstrating, you're a manufacturer, and you're saying, I'm already employing this number of people, but I think that we could employ more.
Absolutely.
And your impact investors will be more interested in that story than just purely. And this cuts across across the environment, social, as well as other issues. Any thoughts on that? Because I know you guys, your business is purely for profit and you've been focusing for profit, but I think it's going to be very difficult to find for profit investors. But a lot of impact investors are already in the country and they're already investing, and would love to partner with businesses?
There are sectors that are well placed for impact investors, and there are also others that are very difficult. Imagine you are Wanki Colliery. So you're definitely out, and maybe you are a beverage, an alcoholic beverage company,
or a tobacco
business, and etc. So it's good for certain businesses that have got a social aspect to their strategy, and it's been coming. But the problem with that kind of funding, it depends on how it's distributed. If it goes through, say, formal government channels, then there's so many youth funds out there. And we even have a whole bank created for women empowerment. And maybe there was a youth bank that was being muted.
It is. No, actually, it is a licensed youth bank.
So the ideas are there, but what we tended to see that those institutions tend to be abused by the people that are supposed to be running them. But I totally agree with you. For example, nothing stops, say, a microfinance outfit to be out there looking for impact kind of investing. So you are raising funds that where you can lend to women, to the vulnerable groups of society. So instead of maybe going into the cutthroat financial markets where you're picking money at exorbitant interest rates, you could possibly use that. But I think that can only be used to complement your
core business.
Core business.
No, we're saying that.
And normal channels of raising capital.
You could have a manufacturer whose business model is not profitable, but they do have capacity to employ more people. And I think that impact investors would be interested in that you're going to employ more people.
But you're sounding more like a socialist now.
No, I'm not a socialist, but I am, because I'm a capitalist, I'm saying that I'm recognizing where you will have a number of hurdles to jump, and where it's actually going to be very easy to raise capital. And I will go with electrons. You know what they say about electrons? Path of least resistance.
100%.
So to me, if there's impact capital, I'm going to take it.
So it's a crisis mode strategy.
Well, look, I mean, I think...
Or opportunity. Opportunity mode strategy.
I think all this discussion has been rather bleak. I think we're taking this view that the macroeconomic outlook is quite negative. I still hold out the possibility that we'll see a significant pivot in economic policy over the next 5 years.
It doesn't change the strategy. If that happens...
Then it's a bonus.
It's a bonus.
But if we have more of the same, then we're in trouble.
If we have more of the same, what you don't want is you don't want to pin your hope on your, pivoting optimism.
Well, hope is not a strategy.
Exactly. Exactly. So what we are saying is, if nothing changes, this is probably the best way of going about it. But if something changes, then kudos. And with that, and on that note, thank you very much for joining us. I think this was quite riveting. I learnt a thing or two, but I think we covered a number of the sectors. Let us know what you guys think. And also, if you've got other ideas or strategies that you would want us to discuss, or that you already think are better for businesses, I think this is the platform. And that's why we started this platform, to be actually helpful for once to business. So I hope this was useful. It was certainly useful for me. Otherwise, have yourself a wonderful Friday and a great weekend.